Hi, my name is Tim Bale and I'm co-director of the Myelin Institute at Queen Mary University of London. Welcome to another in our series of videos on COVID-19. In this video, Dr. Dan Gover of the School of Politics and International Relations at Queen Mary University discusses the challenges that COVID-19 has presented to the UK Parliament, both in terms of the legislative requirements that it has necessitated and in terms of the adaptations that Parliament has had to make. I hope you enjoy the video. If you did, please do share it and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel for more and perhaps sign up to our website to get more updates about the MEI.
For legislatures all across the world, the coronavirus pandemic has presented some really significant challenges for how they are able to continue to go about their scrutiny work. And this has certainly been the case for the UK's Westminster Parliament. In this short video, I want to discuss the nature of those challenges, how the UK Parliament has responded, and also to very briefly consider what some of the longer term consequences might be for how Parliament conducts its work in the future. So beginning with the first of those, the challenge that the UK Parliament has faced, in a nutshell, is that at a time when scrutiny of the executive is needed more than perhaps at any time over recent decades, Parliament hasn't been able to conduct its work physically in the way that it has done in the past. And this has been for various connected reasons related to the pandemic. Famously, the House of Commons chamber is too small to seat all of its MPs. There are 650 constituencies, far fewer than that can actually sit in the main chamber. And so if you've ever seen any big debates in the House of Commons, Prime Minister's questions, the budget, you will often see MPs standing by the doorways, sitting on the steps. And that's just because there isn't enough space for them all to sit. When you couple that with social distancing requirements that mean that MPs have to sit 2 metres apart, it very significantly reduces the capacity of the number of MPs who can sit in the chamber at any one time. So the limit essentially is 50 MPs out of 650. As well as that, of course, there may be other MPs who are unable to participate for other reasons, maybe because they are self-isolating, if they've developed symptoms or have been in contact with somebody who's showing symptoms, maybe if they're shielding because of particular health conditions, if they have caring responsibilities. And of course, it's not just about those MPs themselves. It's also about the fact that they are there to represent their constituents. And so if they are unable to participate because of their health conditions or for other reasons, it means that their constituents aren't being represented in the way that they should be being represented. And of course, as well as that, it's not just about members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. It's also about the very many additional staff, those who work for MPs, but also those who work for the parliamentary authorities, those who need to be there in order that the usual proceedings can operate smoothly. So for all of these reasons, it is clear that continuing as before was clearly not an option. And yet, at the same time, Parliament had also, in late March, passed the Coronavirus Act, which awarded to government extensive new powers that could, and in fact did, affect all of our lives in the UK in very significant ways. And in a parliamentary democracy, in a parliamentary system, it was clearly important that the exercise of those powers was subject to proper democratic debate in Parliament. And in fact, even if that had not been the case, even if new powers hadn't been given to government, the UK faced a moment of real national crisis. And clearly it was important that Parliament was able to properly scrutinise how government dealt with that situation, One of the functions of the UK Parliament is to ensure that ministers are publicly accountable, that they are forced to come to Parliament to answer questions, to do so in a public format where they can be held properly accountable. And so clearly it was important at this moment for Parliament to continue to go about its scrutiny work. So how did the UK Parliament deal with this? Well, parliaments across the world and legislatures across the world have dealt with this in different ways. In the UK, the two chambers adopted different approaches, although what they had in common is that they combined physical proceedings with some virtual proceedings. The House of Commons adopted what's often been referred to as a hybrid model, where members could participate either physically or virtually in the same proceedings. The House of Lords initially adopted a different model where certain types of proceedings were dealt with entirely physically and other types of proceedings were dealt with entirely virtually. I'm going to focus in most of this video on the House of Commons, although I will also return to the House of Lords as well. In terms of the House of Commons, in terms of like the big picture changes, I think there were three big noticeable changes in terms of how the House of Commons went about its business. The first and the earliest was to introduce virtual participation in select committees. Select committees are a really important part of how the House of Commons and indeed the House of Lords scrutinises the government. The most high profile select committees in the House of Commons are those that scrutinise particular departments. So, for example, the Health and Social Care Committee scrutinises the work of the Department for Health and Social Care, etc. These are cross-party groups of MPs that scrutinise the work of the government and of particular departments. And what it meant that they were able to participate virtually is firstly that the scrutiny work of those committees could continue during the height of the pandemic when those MPs clearly couldn't meet physically. It also actually meant that those committees could continue their work when the main Commons chamber was not sitting. This has always been possible, but it was made particularly facilitated by virtual proceedings. So that was the first big change. The second big change, which I've already hinted at, was that MPs could participate in Commons debates virtually. So how this worked is that MPs could still attend the chamber in person, up to the 50 MP limit, but in addition, other MPs could join through video conferencing. And we saw how this worked, for example, in Prime Minister's Questions, where the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition participated in person, but other MPs were able to ask their questions from their constituencies. Initially, this applied only to what was called scrutiny proceedings, so questions, ministerial statements, but very quickly it was expanded to other types of business, such as legislation. The third big change was to enable remote voting in the House of Commons. Traditionally, MPs have voted physically by walking down one of two division lobbies. The shift to remote voting is something that in the past has very much been resisted by some MPs. But the need to deal with legislation and to make decisions on potentially contentious issues meant that they needed some way to be able to vote. And so the House of Commons authorities very quickly developed a system for remote electronic voting. Now, that was the situation until the start of June. At that point, the government decided that it didn't wish to have hybrid Commons sittings any longer, that MPs should return to Westminster. However, the challenges faced by Parliament that I outlined at the start very much remain. It remains the case that social distancing is required in the chamber, remains the case that some MPs won't be able to participate, and therefore that their constituents won't be properly represented. And this led to the scenes of very long queues, MPs waiting to vote, to try and vote in a way that was safe and respected social distancing rules. As a consequence, there has been some rowing back by the government. So some element of hybrid proceedings remains in the Commons. The House of Lords, interestingly, at the same time, adopted a system that is very much like the hybrid proceedings that previously operated in the House of Commons. So the two houses still doing slightly different things, dealing with this in slightly different ways. Well, I think the first thing to say is that although these hybrid arrangements and virtual arrangements have been essential and have enabled scrutiny to continue at a time when they couldn't have previously continued, and have done so in an inclusive way where MPs have been able to participate even if they couldn't have attended physically. Despite that, they're very much a second best. And so I don't sense that there's going to be an enormous amount of clamour for keeping some of these arrangements. Among the limitations are, well, so far certain types of business have not been included, including some of those types of commons business that have been particularly valuable to backbenchers to get their voices heard. But also, we often think of Parliament as being about the formal processes that take place on the public record. But actually, the informal processes are probably just as important. What goes on in the tea rooms, in the cafeterias, in the corridors, the conversations that are had behind the scenes. These are also really important to how Parliament operates. And this was much more difficult during the hybrid processes. Also, visual cues, being able to intervene in debates has become much harder through video conferencing technology. So very much these arrangements have been a second best. And they have highlighted some things that have been problems with how Parliament has operated so far. In the House of Commons, the government essentially controls the Commons agenda. And this has really been highlighted by the controversy over ending the original hybrid arrangements. Had MPs been able to put items on the agenda, maybe that wouldn't have been abandoned in the way that it was. But as well as that, I suspect that there will be some elements of this that may well continue into the future, or at least may well continue in some form. Things that wouldn't have been entertained in the past have, by necessity, been adopted very quickly. Virtual select committees have, I think, been very welcome and have made an important difference to how select committees are able to carry out their work, including at times when the House of Commons isn't sitting in plenary. The ability to have more witnesses who appear before those committees using video conferencing technology. This is something that was possible before, but the norms around that have really changed. And this could be really important for Parliament to hear a wider range of voices, a more diverse set of witnesses, maybe people who would not be able to easily travel to London to appear in person. From this period, are abandoned as soon as Parliament is able to abandon them, it seems quite likely that at least some of these elements, some of these different reforms might continue to be used in the future.